This is a made-for-TV animated special called Under Fist Halloween Bash. It follows the adventures of these three, Billy, Mandy, and Grim, across one quite unique Halloween night. And most of you might know these three characters from a show that ran for over 6 seasons on Cartoon Network, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Some of you might even know that Under Fist Halloween Bash, the thing I'm letting play right now, was the finale of that very series. The final adventure of Billy, Mandy, and Grim. Well, it actually wasn't. Well, hold on. To me and you, it was, but Under Fist Halloween Bash was actually meant to be the pilot. The very first episode, the premiere of The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. That special is a symptom of the reason that Foster's Home and Powerpuff Girls creator Craig McCracken would split from Cartoon Network. It's the reason the creator of Codename Kids Next Door would leave as well. Cartoon Network scrapped Under Fist because they wanted to move towards more live-action programming. The special sat dormant as Cartoon Network experienced its midlife crises, until finally airing as the last piece of closure for Grim, Billy, and Mandy. This small story is both an example of the impact of this show and exactly the kind of story that you'll soon see we probably should have expected. Billy and Mandy was an introduction to dark comedy. Its resurrection, its story, and its quality all wrapped up in a fittingly strange bow. While still at university back in 1995, Maxwell Adams started work on his thesis. It was an animated short titled Billy and Mandy in the Trepanation of the Skull and You. In this short, Billy and Mandy came to the conclusion that they should and must trepanate Billy. This is a medieval surgical technique that involves drilling a hole into the skull in order to access and provide care to the brain. So Mandy drills the hole in Billy's skull and watches as Billy, totally unconcerned, bleeds out. It was disturbed and grotesque, but that's where it laid nearly all of its humor. This is what's called dark comedy. A comedic styling that finds humor in the realities of life that people often try to or want to ignore, and things like death and harm in negative emotion. It's something that had been explored by Ren and Stimpy in the 90s, but it was a type of humor that, while grazed on the most surface of levels by shows that would come later, was largely absent from youth programming by the time the mid-2000s rolled around.
And I'm gonna look down, and I'm gonna laugh.
The show would be reconfigured into a new idea under the Cartoon Network umbrella, at which point Cartoon Network split the show in half, Evil Con Carne and The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. But why was Billy and Mandy, a show in which the Grim Reaper is subjected to a life of servitude, to these two, so popular?
Hey, little girl, come here for a second. That's a nice picnic basket you got there.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, there was a unique magic about this show that so many others strayed away from. There was a perception throughout the 2000s, specifically at networks like Nickelodeon, that generationally speaking, teens were moving away from animation, and the animation that did exist should skew towards younger audiences. It was this era that saw Nick, Cartoon Network, and Disney all move towards live-action programming. With Nickelodeon creating Teen Nick, Disney straying away from their Saturday morning cartoons, but this perception was wrong, an overreaction to a rating shift. As shows began to talk down to their audience to meet the eyes of a younger generation, the best shows hardened their edges and followed their vision. This is all to say that Billy and Mandy, at a time where it would have been easy not to, attempted to introduce its audience to a type of humor that was at times more elevated and almost always more cynical. Alongside courage, it found humor in the things that networks were worried would scare kids away. It found stories in the values that were less than valuable, and importantly, it did it well. Horror is, by definition, scary, but it can be twisted and mangled for laughs. Adams would say in 2015 that the goal was always to scare kids right before he made them laugh, and to have the adults laughing along with them.
No! No!
Horror is, by definition, scary, but it can be twisted and mangled for laughs. Here, a killer tricycle terrorizes the neighborhood in a killing spree. It's hilarious. It's taking the trope of innocence and flipping it on its head. but it's also a direct parody of Stephen King's horror novel Christine about a killer car. This horror flipping was Adam's whole goal. It's why when the trio look into the future in Mandy and the Merciless, they see Mandy as a horrifying worm demon that uses the world's supply of cinnamon as her leverage. It's also a direct reference to the Frank Herbert novel, God Emperor of Doom. This wasn't just horror for a younger generation, this was horror comedy for everybody. What do I mean? Well, take Nursery Crimes, for example. This episode plays out as a trip through the tropes of generation-crossing folklores. At one point, Grimm tells a story of Hansel and Gretel, a story everybody knows, where Billy somehow meets Pinocchio, another story everyone knows, who, as always, wants to be a real boy, but to do so, he must cook and eat Billy's flesh. That's ridiculous. It's dark and it's funny. Dark humor isn't about sad or scary is funny, instead it's about taking the sad and scary and making it funny. A task so many other shows and films confuse or fail to succeed at. Billy and Mandy almost always got it right. But it often used parody in their attempt to find that humor as well. The show wasn't afraid to be an adult show, one that spoke directly to an audience that networks believed did not traditionally engage with animation. Want to see Yogi Bear and Boo Boo as junkies? Well, here they are. Bloodshot eyes, tattered clothing, in all their glory. And it wasn't just to say, hey, look at that. It was to further a narrative of twisted horror, a narrative of twisted comedy. This here is Billy and Mandy's new nanny.
Hello, Mandy. I've been waiting for you. I suppose you know who I am.
An episode titled Scary Poppins. Realizing that parenting Mandy was going to be too much, a nanny is called, and chaos and horror ensue. An episode that plays on not only a darker side to Mary Poppins, but also the anxiety of raising children or becoming a caretaker, a thematic motif likely lost on younger audiences. Taking something so innocent, something that speaks so clearly to a younger audience, and twisting it on its head could produce nothing but terror. But when you apply the absurdity that sits underneath that voice that was once speaking to that audience, like a layer of cushion, you produce comedy. Mary Poppins is an absurd idea. Billy and Mandy takes that stupidity and it makes it funny, while also creating fear. And then there's things like Chicken Ball Z.
Your mother has a job and is a respected member of the community.
No one talks about my mother that way.
An episode where Billy and Mandy uses popular culture to bridge the generation gap and prove itself as a show that can be enjoyed by anyone and everyone. An episode where horror gives way to pure, extremely recognizable comedy. But borrowing is easy. Elevating a show beyond its references, its parodies, is much more difficult. Do your characters still have something to say? Are they still memorable? Are they still unique? And a grim surprise, Grimm recreates the Grinch's growth and heart size, and it's moments like these that set the stage for this show's success. It's a show that didn't have a shtick. It's a show whose heart grew alongside those very characters. The horror, the comedy, the parodies, the references were all vehicles for that growth.
Those your sheets, honey? Was it the dream about the clowns again?
And I think this dark comedy came easily for the people writing the show. Besides creator Maxwell himself, C.H. Greenblatt was also a writer on Grim Adventures. He, by the way, is primarily responsible for these twisted visual gags in SpongeBob. The gross-ups, as some people have taken to calling them. It was Greenblatt's mind that originally distorted the way we viewed SpongeBob, and who'd also go on to create things like Chowder. Another writer on the show was Aaron Springer, another contributor to SpongeBob's run, and a fan of pushing darker, grosser moments into SpongeBob's world as well. 16 different people are credited as directors throughout the show's 6-season run. That means that across 80+ episodes, there were 16 people all attempting to get their visions across. What this creates, if you watch the show all the way through, is a variety in the darkness. Some of the show's episodes are substantially more horrifying than others, some are more focused on the comedy, but its revolving creative team manages to maintain a semblance of cohesion throughout the show's run that left it feeling fresh until the bitter end. Billy and Mandy was a unique beast.
You okay? You don't look so hot. You're not respecting my personal space!
Bright, pretty colors, round shapes, happy endings, these are the tenets that mainstream animation were once built on. Some shows tried in the 90s to disrupt that order, and some succeeded. But Billy and Mandy kicked down the door one decade later and applied a thick, viscous layer of anarchy to animation that was both refreshing and sorely needed. It's easy to brush shows like Grim Adventures off as just another cartoon. After all, it's easy to brush off animation as youthful fluff to begin with. But that attitude requires blinders when it comes to Billy and Mandy. Dark comedy, black comedy is an art, both in animation and outside of it. It isn't easy to pull off. In fact, in many ways, it's harder than traditional comedy. The goal isn't just a laugh. You have to make someone uncomfortable and then make them laugh. The two are almost mutually exclusive, and it creates a Herculean task. Maxwell Adams and his team created something too many others were scared to even attempt. And then he scared the shit out of them every time they flipped to the final product. How's that for not giving up?
This video is the biggest load of hoo-ha I've ever seen. Why do you insist we watch this stupid thing?
Am I the only one who understands the complexities of this ambitious cinematic masterpiece?
That is it for today's episode of Nerdstalgic. If you enjoyed this video, press that like button, let me know. Also, press subscribe and the little notification bell next to it. That way you never miss any episodes of Nerdstalgic. And I will see you guys in the next video.